My objective last night when we got off the phone was to show you, not yesterday, was not only is there nothing in the Talmud about John the Baptist, but nothing in all of rabbinical literature ever even mentions John the Baptist, with maybe the exception of where they're debating with Christians and saying, it says in your New Testament about John the Baptist. That was my objective. So
Yes.
I took my database, which is the Bar Ilan Responsive Project. It's estimated to have something like 100,000 Jewish Hebrew rabbinical books typed in. Now, just to give you an idea, the Talmud is considered one book in that collection of 100,000 books, and it has over 1 million words alone.
Mm.
So when we say it's 100,000 books, it's a lot of words. It's
Yes.
books that stretch all the way to modern times and back to the earliest rabbinical literature that survived. So Megillat Ta'anit, for example, from the Second Temple period.
Mm-hmm.
So I do a search for John the Baptist, and then I decide to do a second search for Yochanan ben Zechariah, because that's what Rabbi Soloveitchik refers to him as, right? He calls him John, son of Zechariah. And I was 100% sure and confident I would be able to come back today and say, well, Keith, I looked in the Bar Ilan Responsive Project, the core of rabbinical. It's not every single book in rabbinical literature, because there's books that are still in manuscript form, right? But it's essentially almost every book that's been printed. Over 100,000 books. I was confident I would be able to say John the Baptist is never even mentioned once in rabbinical literature, and certainly not in the Talmud. And I got a big surprise that, in fact, there is one rabbi in the Bar Ilan Responsive Project database who refers to John the Baptist, and he actually refers to him 3 separate times. And then when I looked, well, who is this rabbi? He's some obscure rabbi I never heard of. I found out he's actually a really famous rabbi who I never heard of. He was definitely famous in his day, and in some circle, he's still pretty well known. And let me pull up what he said. He's a rabbi who was born in Salamanca, Spain. In 1492, he had to flee from Spain, and he went to Portugal.
Mm.
And during a brief period in Portugal, he changed the world. He essentially established the foundation of the modern world that we lived in during his short stint in Portugal. When the Jews were then persecuted in Portugal, he fled to Tunisia and eventually died either in Jerusalem or somewhere in that region, possibly Damascus. The rabbi's name was Rabbi Abraham ben Samuel Zacuto, 1452 to 1515. What's that?
He's my new friend.
He's your new friend. So this rabbi wrote a book called Sefer Yuchasin, which some people translate as the Book of History, but really it's the Book of Genealogies. And what it gives is the whole history of the Jewish people from creation down to his time in the 1490s or early 1500s when he's writing this. And in section 6, or Ma'amar Shishi, he mentions John the Baptist 3 times. Now, before I get to that, I want to explain who this rabbi is. Can I do that? Because like I said, I hadn't heard of him, but when I looked up who he was, I was like, wow, he's a really important figure in history. So this rabbi is best known in history, not for his Sefer Yuchasin, his book of genealogies, but he's better known in history for a book he wrote called Hachibur Hagadol, the great book, or the great composition, literally. The Great Composition was translated into many languages, and the reason it was translated and so important is it established astronomical tables that were accurate enough to use for navigation at sea. In addition, this Rabbi Zacuto also invented a new type of astrolabe that up until then they were on a ship, right? And they were trying to travel to India. So they'd have to pull up to the coast, land on the coast, take a measurement, go back to sea. He invented an astrolabe that could be used at sea. It's a thing where you're able essentially to navigate not only at night by the North Star, but during the day using the sun. So he invents this astrolabe, and then he teaches Columbus how to use it, as well as Vasco da Gama.
Back up. When you say he teaches Columbus, you mean the Columbus?
Christopher Columbus, we know for a fact, used his tables in the Great Composition of Chibur Gadol, based on a Latin translation, and Columbus used it particularly. There's an incident that took place in February of 1504. This is incredible stuff. This history. So Columbus is in Jamaica in 1504, and he's run out of food, and the locals in Jamaica are feeding him, and they feed the guy for 6 months, him and his men who are stranded in Jamaica, waiting for a certain time of the year to be able to travel back to Spain. And finally, Jamaicans are like, dude, get a job, or we're not going to feed you. like you're like, why are we feeding you for 6 months? Like, go do some farming. Like, what?
It worked for a month, for 2. You're telling me after a while, they're like, look, this is not.
They're like, look, the benefits have run out. Get out of here, dude.
Yeah, unemployment.
And so Columbus goes to their leader, and he says to them, if you don't feed me, God will get angry with you and turn the moon red as blood. And what Columbus had done is he'd looked in the tables of Rabbi Abraham Zacuto, and he saw that night there was going to be an eclipse.
So you're telling me, wait, it's that accurate? It's that accurate.
Absolutely. Oh, it's even better. So then Columbus goes into his boat, into his into his headquarters, and the people start bringing food because the moon is turned red. It's a lunar eclipse, and they're terrified. They think, wow, the gods are angry with us. And he times it to come out 10 minutes before the eclipse ends. And he then proclaims to the natives in Jamaica, and he says to them, okay, God is no longer angry with you because you brought me the food. The moon will turn back to its regular color. 10 minutes later, it turns back, and this saves Columbus. So he actually used this to trick the Native Americans of Jamaica into believing he had, the power of the gods or whatever. But the tables were that accurate. Vasco da Gama was personally trained by Rabbi Zacuto in how to use these tables in the astrolabe, and then Vasco da Gama ended up becoming the first person to actually, from Europe, to make it to India. Columbus wasn't trying to get to Jamaica and the Dominican Republic, Hispaniola. He was trying to get to India. Vasco da Gama actually got there in 1497, 1498, using Rabbi Zacuto's tables. So, what is Rabbi Zacuto, who wrote the great composition, who also wrote the history of the Jews from creation to his time? He says 3 things about John the Baptist. Now, he gives the years in Hebrew years. I translated them into BC and AD. He says, in 1 BCE, John the Baptist was born. John, son of Zechariah the priest, and his wife were barren. And John was born 6 months before that certain person. So he's...
Slow down. Folks, look, let's slow down for a second.
Yeah.
And this is for me and for those that are listening.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that there's a rabbi,
yeah,
who is an author of some really important works.
The most important book of the 15th century, absolutely.
Okay, really important works. One of them has to do with the history of the Jewish people, the genealogy.
Yeah.
Would that be the...
Well, I mean, it's called Sefer Yuchasin, which is the book of genealogies or histories.
Okay.
Literally genealogies.
So he's going to write about this, and you're saying in the midst of this, he mentions John the Baptist.
Oh, he's giving the history of the Jews. Right? He gives it year by year. He says, 2 BC, 1 BC, 1 AD, right? And he doesn't say it in AD and BC. He's giving according to the chronology from, as he understands, the creation of the world.
Okay.
And then he goes on. Now it's interesting. So you could ask the question: how does he know that John was the son of Zechariah the priest and his wife, and then Zechariah the priest and his wife were barren? And he says 6 months before that certain person, meaning Jesus, right? Because he's living in under persecution in Portugal. He's really careful. Anything he says about Yeshua could get him killed. So he refers to him indirectly. He's afraid to talk about Yeshua, but he could talk about John. Then he says, in the year 13 CE or AD, Herod Antipas reigned and took over the kingdom of Archelaus, his brother. He reigned 24 years and divided the kingdom into 4 parts, with the Galilee by itself, etc. That's why Antipas is also called Herod the Tetrarch. Right? This is one of Herod's sons. He was cruel, and this is an incredible line. This is a rabbi writing this. This is a rabbi who was persecuted by Christians, right? He is not trying to be an apologist to make Jews look good in the eyes of Christians, or he's not writing. He's writing to a Jewish audience. He's hoping Christians never see this. So here's what he writes: Herod Antipas the Tetrarch was cruel and killed his sons, deposed priests and violated the Torah by slaughtering John the Baptist because John rebuked him for taking the wife of his brother. Now we're going to get to that, John's rebuke, taking the wife of his brother. Maybe in a later section we'll get to it. But that's interesting. This rabbi could have said, the one thing that Herod Antipas did correctly is he slaughtered the saint of the Christians, who was a sinner who violated the Torah. Instead, he says, Herod Antipas, the tetrarch, was cruel, killed his sons, deposed priests, and violated the Torah by slaughtering John the Baptist. That's pretty cool.
Wait. Okay, go to the third one, and then I have to ask it.
And interestingly, he doesn't call him Yochanan HaMatbil in this passage, which I would have expected, and he does in the next one. He calls him Yochanan HaMitabel, which is just a different grammatical form of the same word. In other words, he uses the PL form for those who know grammar instead of the he feel form. Not very important, but for those who know grammar, it's important. It's interesting. Then he says, in the year 1105, and here he actually gives the Christian year, the Genoese captured Tripoli and Sicily and some other cities he lists. They gave these cities to the king of Jerusalem, who was a Christian at that time. So this is during the Crusades. It is said that they brought at that time the ashes of John the Baptist to Genoa, for his body was burned, even though his head is in Rome. So those are three references to John the Baptist, one when he was born, one about him being killed by Herod Antipas the tetrarch, and the third about his ashes brought to Genoa. Now, how does he know the ashes were brought to Genoa? I mean, he read this in some Christian book somewhere, right? Or somebody told him that. He wasn't there. It was, 300 years before he was born.
Okay, $167,000 question.
Yeah.
The sources of his information about John the Baptist.
So it's hard to believe the sources of his information are anything other than the New Testament.
And that's all.
Meaning he's read Luke. He's clearly read Luke. He's read Matthew. He may have read some of the other Gospels. Specifically, we know he must have read Luke because Luke's the one that mentions Zechariah the priest. We don't hear anything in Matthew about that.
Now, this is important, Nehemia. You have a background in what I'm going to ask you, and there's a lot that we can unpack here. But one thing I would like you to help unpack is, why is it at that time that he would have read the New Testament?
So it's possible that he may have actually been forced to read the New Testament. That's a strong possibility. 1492, he and thousands of other Jews were told either convert to Christianity and really Catholicism, convert to Catholicism or leave Spain. Mm-hmm. So many left, most left. Some stayed behind, and they said, okay, you know what? We'll just pretend to be Christians, continue to practice Judaism secretly. In our homes, nobody needs to know what we're doing. And then they were persecuted by the Spanish Inquisition. He left. He went to Portugal. And in Portugal, in I believe it was 97, a number of years later, they then say to the Jews, instead of convert or leave, they say convert or die. Mm-hmm. And this rabbi had enough resources where I don't know if he bribed somebody or he snuck out in the middle of the night, but he was able to flee to Tunis, to Tunisia. And there he was able to continue to live as a Jew for a while until he had to flee to some other place. So why is it he read the New Testament? He may have been forced to. It may have been part of the process where they said, look, we're going to kick you out of this country. We might kill you, but read the book. And then he may have read the book. Maybe he thought, you know what? Maybe I will convert. You know what? What's so horrible about this religion? And he reads the book. And if I was him reading the book, and then I look at the Catholic Church and I'm like, wait a minute, you guys don't follow the religion of this book. But here is a rabbi, and think about this. This is actually pretty profound. So this is before Martin Luther translated the Bible in Germany into German. It's before, certainly before the authorized version in England in 1611. I'm not sure when Wycliffe was. This might have been after Wycliffe. But the average Christian had not read the New Testament, and this rabbi had.